I'd like to engage you in a thought experiment this morning. Imagine that your well-being, perhaps even your survival, is dependent on whether or not other people take a particular action. You can take that action yourself, but it doesn't benefit you directly. Rather, it benefits other people. The benefit to you comes from other people taking that action. So you are relying on them. So my question is, would you take that action, knowing that it won't help you, but that it will help other people? Oh, and let's say that taking this action is a little inconvenient for you. Would you do it? Okay, this isn't so much of a thought experiment because the action I'm talking about is wearing a mask during this pandemic. So this is actually a real experiment to see if our society is capable of doing something small and not that inconvenient, when the real benefit of that action goes to everyone other than the person doing it. And yes, while there is a little benefit, depending on the type of mask, in terms of preventing the wearer from breathing in virus droplets, the fact is that we wear masks to keep other people safe, just in case we're infected and don't know it. So far, I would say the results of this experiment have been mixed. A lot of people, I think, understand that wearing a mask is the right thing to do, even that it's an act of loving kindness. Most people I see in the supermarket, for example, are wearing masks and wearing them correctly. Some people evidently failed basic biology and don't seem to understand that when they breathe out, their breath comes out of their nose too. On the other hand, the act of wearing a mask has become politicized, in some cases, unfortunately, resulting in violence by people who don't know the difference between freedom and liberation. As one meme I saw recently put it so well, the anti-maskers seem to think of themselves as William Wallace from the movie Braveheart, when in fact they're more like Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. The fact that we wear masks to help other people rather than ourselves reminds me of the parable of the long spoons that Greg referenced in his testimonial. Attributed to the 19th century Rabbi Chaim of Romischok in Lithuania, this story tells of a person who prayed to know what heaven and hell were like. So an angel took this person to a room with a large round table around which were a number of people. In the middle of the table was a large pot of stew, and it smelled delicious. But all of the people around the table were thin and sickly and miserable. Then the person whom the angel had brought to visit noticed that each of the people around the table had a very long spoon, long enough to reach the pot in the middle of the table to take a spoonful of stew, but too long to then get the stew into their own mouths. Some of the people were trying to hold the spoons up and drop the stew into their mouths, so their faces and clothes were covered in it. Other people were blaming one another for their situation, even hitting one another with their spoons. No wonder they were miserable. The visitor shuddered at the sight of their suffering and said, "Angel, what is this place?" And the angel said, "This is hell." Then the angel took the person who wanted to know what heaven and hell were like to another room. At first, it appeared the same. There was a large round table, around which were a number of people with long spoons, and in the middle of the table was a large pot of stew. Then the visitors saw the difference. In this room, the people were well fed and hale and happy. The visitor said, "Angel, I don't understand. Everything is the same, but it's different." And the angel said, "Look closer." Then the visitor noticed that the people around the table were using their spoons not to try to feed themselves, but to feed one another. And the angel said, "This is heaven." The moral of the story, of course, is that it's not necessarily our circumstances that make the difference between happiness and misery. Rather, it's how we are treating one another that determines whether we are in heaven or in hell. Of course, the fact that the right thing to do might be something that benefits other people rather than ourselves, that sometimes doing the right thing for others means making a sacrifice ourselves, that concept appears to be entirely alien to our so-called president. According to an article published this week in The Atlantic and corroborated by a number of other sources, including Fox News, our supposed commander-in-chief has repeatedly disparaged military personnel, veterans, and the war dead, calling those who were killed or captured in battle losers and those who enlisted to serve our nation suckers. He can't fathom the idea of doing something for someone other than himself, a retired four-star general told The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, who wrote the article. He just thinks that anyone who does anything when there's no direct personal gain to be had is a sucker. There's no money in serving the nation. It's one way of understanding relationships between people, that is, on the basis of a transaction. I do something for you because you give me something to make it worth my while. Otherwise, I won't do it. It's a very childish way of understanding relationships between people that most people, thankfully, grow out of as they grow up. The fact that our so-called president can't understand someone doing something for a reason other than personal gain is a national disgrace. The fact that he can't understand someone serving the Constitution rather than whoever sits in the Oval Office is a national tragedy. As some have put it, he's basically America's id incarnate. He's all of our worst instincts and desires and impulses stuffed into a poorly tailored suit. Forget about treating other people with respect because, well, they're people. Never mind that sometimes we need to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. And heaven forbid that we might have to give up something ourselves so that others can gain so much more. No, instead it's greed and hate and fear. Oh, and lying about the greed and hate and fear. We can do better than this. We must do better than this. We've sunk to such a low that it's going to take us a while to get back up again. And we're going to need to learn how to get back up again together. And we must do it together. The titles of my sermons this Sunday and next come from the way I've come to explain Unitarian Universalism, my version of an elevator speech, to put the most core tenets of our faith into words that can be shared in the time it takes an elevator to go from one floor to the next. It's in two parts, one for Unitarianism and one for Universalism, and the first part comes from the fact of our interdependence. We are all in this together. This isn't a religious idea unique to Unitarian Universalism, of course. In his first letter to the Corinthians, preceding the well-known chapter on the subject of love, Paul talks of all of the different people with all of their different gifts as being like the different parts of the body, all of them valued for what they are rather than rejected for what they are not. And in our own time, Thich Nhat Hanh has simply explained, we are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. It's not an idea that's unique to religion either. Science gives us plenty of examples of the fact of our interdependence, and without needing to engage in any quantum flapdoodle. Just think about the vast cycles of water and carbon that connect us with every other living being on the surface of this planet, and the fact that the climate crisis we're facing is a direct result of our refusal to acknowledge that we are very much a part of those cycles. And so, while Unitarianism emerged 2 centuries ago from what most of us would now consider a rather academic debate over the humanity and/or divinity of Jesus, today's Unitarianism lifts up not merely the unity of God, but the unity of our world, the unity of life on earth, the unity of the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are truly and completely and inescapably a part. We are all in this together. Of course, merely reciting that fact won't change anything. We must also live it. I selected today's reading by the Reverend Dr. Monica Cummings before I knew that she was, as of this month, the Assistant Minister of Pastoral Care at the Bradford Community Church, UU, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which must be one hell of a place to be providing pastoral care right now. Along with our middle hymn, which is based on a Buddhist metta meditation, I wanted to lift up the role that loving kindness plays in all of this, another idea common to many religions, from agape in Christianity and chesed in Judaism to metta in Buddhism. So Dr. Cummings gives some practical ways to remember that you are a part of the interconnected web of life. Bless a stranger with a smile. Tell the people in your life how much they mean to you. And take a moment every day to give thanks for all that you have. Here's something else you can do to live the fact that we are all in this together. Install the Virginia Department of Health's COVID-Wise app on your smartphone. In case you haven't heard of it, let me explain what it is. COVID-Wise is an exposure notification app that works by remembering when it was in the vicinity of other smartphones with COVID-Wise. It does this by having your phone send out low-power Bluetooth pings and by listening for those pings coming from other phones. Every ping uses a random code that changes often and does not contain any personal information. Should someone with COVID-Wise on their phone get tested and it's positive, they can then choose to report that in the app with a code given to them by the health department. And that gives COVID-Wise permission to notify the app on phones that were pinged during the last 2 weeks. Again, it does this without sharing any information about anybody's identity. Now, if, like me, you're wary of how much information we're giving away to big tech these days, then maybe you're cautious about installing an app like COVID-Wise. However, it does seem that the claims that the app respects privacy hold up. It was investigated by reporters at the Washington Post, and it does seem to be doing what the Virginia Department of Health promises, with no personally identifiable information or location information being shared. As the author of one article wrote, a random weather app you downloaded is probably doing far more to put your privacy at risk. So from the tech side, COVID-Wise seems to be fine. The big question is whether it actually works in practice to let people know when they might have been exposed to someone with coronavirus. And the answer to that question depends almost entirely on how many people install it on their phones. After all, there needs to be some sort of critical density such that on a trip to the supermarket, say, there are enough people with COVID-Wise on their phones that they actually ping one another. If you have it on your phone, but you're the only one with it any place you go, well, you might as well not have it. But if enough people install it then all those pings will make enough of a loose network of connections through time and space that an exposure notification might make a real difference to someone's well-being, perhaps even their survival. So, as the title of the Washington Post article put it, I downloaded America's first coronavirus exposure app. You should too. Ultimately, of course, living the fact that we are all in this together is something that needs to be learned and practiced. And that means it's going to take time. Loving our enemies might be an excellent bar for living our interdependence, but it's a high bar. And for most of us, it's going to take some work to get up to that. That's why, in her 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, scholar of comparative religion Karen Armstrong makes love your enemies step number 12. Some of you are familiar with Armstrong's work from presentations in the Sunday Morning Forum or from your own reading. So you'll know that she would have us start with something that doesn't require us to be a saint right off the bat. Learn about loving kindness first. Look for ways that the golden rule shows up or fails to show up, and have compassion for yourself so that you can then have empathy for others. Practice mindfulness and engage in small acts of kindness. Accept your own limits and make compassionate communication a habit. Recognize that this applies to everyone. Expand our knowledge and understanding of other cultures and religions. Recognize personal connections with the suffering of others, and the supreme test of compassion, love your enemies. These are 12 steps that we not only need to take as individuals, but that our society needs to take too. My mother has a saying that it takes at least as long for something to get better as it took to go bad. And I don't know how long it took for the simple idea of looking out for our fellow citizens to be dismissed as socialism. But we all need to start working on practicing loving kindness and developing compassion as soon as possible. And I don't just mean those of us here. I realize I'm preaching to the choir, because as you use, we've already embraced these ideas, from the inherent worth and dignity of each person to the interdependent web of all existence. If we believe that these ideas can save the world, then we need to practice them and demonstrate them for everyone else to see, to shift the Overton window away from greed and hate and fear and toward generosity and compassion and solidarity. So wear your mask in public places. Download the COVIDwise app. Tell the people in your life how much they mean to you. Engage in small acts of kindness. Vote. Make a difference. May it be so.